Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the International Trumpet Guild podcast. My name is Raquel Samayoa, and I'm on the board of directors. It is my incredible honor to welcome our first guest to the series, David Hickman. David doesn't need any introductions as he is so well known. However, here's a little bit about David. David is a Regents Professor of Trumpet at Arizona State University. He recorded 19 solo albums. He's been with the Rafael Mendez Brass Institute for over about 36 summers. He's published outstanding books such as The Piccolo Trumpet Big Book, Trumpet Lessons with David Hickman, Volumes 1 through 5, and Music Speed Reading. He's also the author of Trumpet Pedagogy, a compendium of modern teaching techniques, and Trumpet Greats, a biographical dictionary. Mr. Hickman is also founder and president of Summit Brass and helped establish Summit Records. He served as president of the International Trumpet Guild from 1977 to 1979, and in 2005 received the International Trumpet Guild's prestigious Award of Merit. He was also awarded the ITG's Honorary Award in 2017. Notably, David Hickman is the only person to date to receive both of ITG's top awards. Quite frankly, your career is outstanding and inspiring. I'm a huge admirer of yours. I've enjoyed your recordings, particularly the golden age of brass albums. I use your piccolo trumpet books in my studio and use your compendium in my trumpet literature class. I am also grateful that you established the Rafael Mendez Library at Arizona State University. So thank you so much for being here. Please tell us a little bit about yourself before jumping into how ITG began.
Well, you pretty much nailed it. I grew up in a little farm town in Nebraska and ended up going to the University of Colorado for my bachelor's degree. Graduated in 72, and then I went to Wichita State University for my master's, where I was a grad assistant, and 2 years there. And then I got my first full-time teaching job at the University of Illinois in 1974. And I was there for 8 years, promoted to associate professor. And I moved to Arizona State University in 1982 and taught there for 37 years. Retired almost 7 years ago. And after that, I did, the year after I retired, I did teach at the University of Texas in Austin for 1 year. It was a part-time thing. They brought in 4 people, Chris Martin, Ryan Anthony, Michael Martin, and myself, and we kind of alternated weeks. So I did that for a year, and then been enjoying retirement ever since then, you know. So that's all there is to know about me.
Well, you've been quite busy. Can you tell us a little bit about how ITG began? I know you were there at the very beginning.
Well, the idea came from Harvey Phillips, who was the tuba professor at Indiana University. Harvey established the Tubist Universal Brotherhood Association, or TUBA as it was called back then. And he encouraged his colleague, Charles Gorham, who was one of the trumpet professors at IU, to start a trumpet guild. So Charlie hooked up with Robert Nagel. So they were kind of the two figureheads at first. And then Charlie formed a interim steering committee, which just had a handful of people. This was in kind of late 1973, fall of 73. And so that included Gorham and Nagel, Tom Stevens, Carol Reinhardt, Reynold Schilke, Charles Colin, Ward Cole, Gordon Matthew, and myself. And I was the only young person on there, although Carol was pretty young. She's a few years older than me. But all the others were, generally 20, 25 years older than us. So I was the kid on there. Why I was asked, I don't really know. I was the new professor at Illinois, and maybe he wanted to get somebody young. But that's how it got started. And then there was a lot of correspondence, amongst the committee. And then Charlie and Harvey put together a meeting at the, it was one of the, I guess it was the 1974 Midwest Band and Orchestra Clinic in Chicago. And Harvey had a hotel suite, and so he invited people from the interim steering committee to show up. So we had a meeting there, which ended up being just Harvey, Charlie, and me. And we talked for a couple hours and kind of divided up duties of all the things that needed to be done. And with only really just Charlie and me doing most of the work, it was quite a bit of things to get done. Harvey volunteered the articles of incorporation that he used for TUBA. And then Charlie and he just sort of modified it to make it work for Trumpet Guld instead of TUBA. Turned that in and got the IRS to approve it as a nonprofit tax-exempt 501c3 corporation. And then it was launched. Charlie wanted to have the first ITG conference at Indiana University, which was in early June of 1975. And so there were some good artists there for that. They had Bill Adam, Alan Dean, Cat Anderson, Robert Levy, Louis Davidson, Ron Modell, Robert Nagel, Fred Sauter, Reynolds Schilke, Charles Schluter, and myself. There may have been others, but those were most of them. And it was a 3 or 4 day conference, and it went very well. And we had our first meetings, and we wanted to elect officers and board of directors. The thing about Charlie, he was a very determined person to get this thing going, and he did a great job with that. He was also very dogmatic. He wanted things done his way. And so the people that came, that were on the interim steering committee, when we came to that meeting to develop the nominations list for the officers and board, he was very adamant about not having any of us be in the officers or be on the board. So we asked who we should nominate because, we wanted to get people that had been involved with ITG. Well, he had studied with Lloyd Geisler when he was in the service band, and he got his master's with Lloyd at the Catholic University of America. And he thought Lloyd would be the perfect figurehead to be president. So he nominated him, and I can't remember if there were any other nominees for president. There may have been people that we nominated, but Charlie pretty much shot him down. He wanted Geisler. And he also wanted Cliff Lilia as vice president because he was a senior level guy, a big name teacher at the University of Michigan. And anyways, all of the ballots went out to ITG members. People voted. All the ballots came back to Charlie. Charlie tabulated them. And guess what? The president was Lloyd Geisler, who I later learned to love this man like a father. He was such a great guy, great trumpet player, great conductor, great teacher. But he had not really been involved with ITG at all. He didn't come to the conference. He wasn't on the steering committee. Well, we had decided during that meeting in Bloomington that the next year, 76, the ITG conference would be part of Harvey Phillips' his International Brass Congress that was to be in Switzerland, in Montreux, Switzerland. And so we were already committed to be part of that. But then the next ITG conference was on its own, I volunteered to have it at the University of Illinois in 1977. So that was slated. So that was already planned and we were going. And when it came time for me to start getting preparations going for that 77 conference, I thought, well, no one has ever told me anything about a budget. I don't know what to do. I don't know how much money I could spend. So I thought I better call Lloyd Geisler. So I called Lloyd and talked to him for the first time I ever talked to him. I hadn't even met him in person at that point. And he was the new president. And it was kind of a funny story because I introduced myself and told him I was conference chair, which he didn't know anything about. And that we were going to get it planned and start advertising. And I asked him about budget. And of course, he just kind of said, well, I don't know. No one had ever talked to him about it. He just said, do whatever you think is prudent. Just try not to lose money. And the conference actually made a small profit, I think $3,000, which seemed like a lot of money back in those days. But during that conversation with Lloyd, I kept referring to ITG, and he finally said, I have to stop you. He said, what is ITG? And I said, International Trumpet Guild? And then he was kind of embarrassed. He said, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I've always heard about it as International Trumpet Guild. I never heard ITG. So that, just shows how much he had been involved with ITG up to that point. But he turned out to be a very good president, a good leader, came to all the conferences, and everybody loved that man. And then the secretary was David Baldwin, and Gordon Matthey was the treasurer. And they got a new board of directors at that time, which was Bud Brisboy and Charlie Colin, Carol Reinhardt, Roger Voisin, Susan Slaughter, Don Smithers, Ward Cole, and myself. So that's how it got going. Yeah.
How was it advertised back then? I guess, was there a journal at this point?
Well, we advertised in some music magazines, The Instrumentalist and some other things. We also had a newsletter that we started, and the newsletter was really crude. It started off as a one-page little hand-typed on a typewriter thing that didn't even say ITG newsletter. It just had some little things like so-and-so got this job and little announcements. And Charlie Gorham, I think, put that together and mailed it out every quarter. And then I think it was late 75, maybe in 76, somewhere in there, Stephen Glover took over doing the newsletter because he owned the Brass Press publications. And he was a very, very good writer and had a good printing press. So he was actually printing the newsletter, which was usually 4, maybe 8 pages. And he would print it up and then he did the mailing out to all the ITG members. And then he's the one that started the journal. So it started off as, I think, 3 newsletters every quarter. And then once a year was the journal, which was a pretty big magazine. Not quite as big as we have now, but close. And so Stephen started that and did it for many years till he, stepped down from being the editor of that. 20 years or something like that.
Did you attend? You mentioned the second conference was in Switzerland. Was that correct?
Yes, I was there. Yeah.
How did that go? I mean, how was it? Was it well received abroad?
Yeah, that was very successful. It was put on by Harvey Phillips and a man named Richard Zellner. Zellner was an American trumpet player, but he had moved to Switzerland to be director of a conservatory of music in Montreux, Switzerland. I'm not sure I remember the name of that conservatory offhand, but they together decided to do this World Brass Congress. So they got all the trombones, trombones, tuba, horns, trumpets. Everybody was there. all the instruments. And they had big name artists and groups from all over the world. And on trumpet, they had Timothy Dockchitzer. He was kind of the big gun for trumpet. And Tom Stevens, Carol Reinhardt played a recital. Pierre Thibault from the Paris Conservatory. Knut Holvalt, who was principal in the Copenhagen Philharmonic. Ed Tarr gave a recital. Don Smithers was there. A group from Chicago, trumpet group called The Forefront, which doesn't exist anymore, but they were popular for a few years. And big names on all the instruments, and that was in '78, and that was a very successful thing. I suppose there were, I don't remember how many people. I'm say maybe 1,000, which was the first of its kind and pretty big back then.
Right, because before that, I mean, there wasn't any other conferences happening. I guess the International Brass Congress was the only thing happening at the time and of course, tuba.
Yeah. Well, before that, for trumpet, there was the National Trumpet Symposium that was held in Denver. That, in some ways, that kind of started this whole trumpet conference idea. That was hosted by Lee Burns at the University of Denver. And Lee did 6 symposiums. And because I went to school at the University of Colorado, I was able to go to all of them. That was close by. And that was a fantastic thing. The year that they had Maurice Andre, which I think was during the 5th year, they had maybe 500 people, which was pretty big. And he ended up moving to, Lee moved to the University of Oklahoma to be orchestra director. And so the trumpet symposium at the University of Denver died when he left. The 6th one, he brought in a lot of big name artists, Dizzy Gillespie and Maynard Ferguson and some others. It was a big deal, and he went way over budget. And so I guess because he knew he had a job somewhere else and was leaving, he didn't care. I don't know. But he went quite a bit over budget. So the new trumpet teacher was not able to continue it because the director of the school said, we lost money on it. We're going to shut it down. But it did happen another couple years at the University of Oklahoma. Lee advised the trumpet teacher there back then to start it, and they did a couple of them. But it never really, I don't think, was as big as the one in Denver. So maybe it was a good thing. But anyways, it eventually stopped there too. So the Trumpet Guild just sort of took over that whole annual conference idea right after Denver and Oklahoma.
In those early years, nowadays we have all these sessions, research room. When it first started, was it just performances, or were there any sort of talks as part of the conference?
Well, there were some lectures, but most of it was performances, some master classes. There were, there might be scientists like Arthur Benaid gave a talk on trumpet acoustics. Schilke would do a talk on trumpet design. So yeah, there were lectures. Dr. David DeBell from the University of Wisconsin came down at the Illinois conference to give a talk about plastic and reconstructive surgery in the throat to help trumpet players, particularly people that had the leakage through the sinuses when they play, the leaky valve there, and
Right.
he could correct that. So there were different lectures, but no, they didn't have as many types of programs as they have now at the conferences.
I'm looking at my notes, and it's in 1988, plans were begun to form a larger European component of ITG. Do you remember how that began and how it was received?
Yeah, Ed Tarr was vice president when I was president, and he kept telling everybody, we need to have more Europeans involved. And the Europeans it's a different mentality amongst musicians over there than it is here. Here, all the trumpet players are, buddies. We want to get together. We want to see each other at least once a year, go out and have dinner, have drinks, let's really make it a social thing as much as a educational and artistic thing. But in Europe, trumpet playing, particularly in the orchestras, it's more of a job. You finish your rehearsals and concerts, whatever, you just go home. You don't go out and have beer with your trumpet buddies from the trumpet section. And at least there's a lot less of that than there is in this country. But Tar was trying to get the Europeans to be more social and be more of a joiner, and they weren't that interested. So he wanted to have conferences in Europe to get them more involved and get them more on the same bandwagon. So I think he hosted that conference in Basel, Switzerland, and it did well. I think it got a lot of people there, but he wasn't planning to do it every year, and he kind of tried to pass the torch and nobody picked it up. So the conferences in Europe for ITG or other brass things have not happened as often as we'd like, mainly because you got to find a host who's willing to do it and have the right location and then see if they can take the financial responsibility for it or whatever. So we hope that we'll have more foreign ones.
Yeah, we have in 2028, there'll be a conference in Ireland, Cork, Ireland.
Great.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So if you've gone to, and I think I've met you in person at a solo competition for the first time at ITG. The competitions now are a huge part of the conference. Do you remember how that began?
Well, yeah, it started when I hosted the 77 conference at Illinois. I kept trying to think, how can we draw as many people to the conference as possible? And I thought we need to get a lot of students there. So let's have a student solo competition. And that'll get a lot of people to apply. We'll have, of course, the people there. I think they picked like 8 finalists. And then I thought, that's not enough. We need more. What else can we do? So we decided to have a mock orchestra audition. And we can also have a jazz improvisation competition. And I thought, well, that's pretty good. That should draw a lot of students. And then I started having a lot of colleagues, other university professors that would contact me and say, I'd like to go, but I want my university to pay my expenses and my tuition. Can I get my name on the poster somewhere? Is there anything I could do? If my name's on the poster, I can convince them to pay for it. So I thought a little while, and I thought, well, let's have a concert with like 50 trumpet professors. And then I found, took the name Festival of Trumpets from the Jerry Schwartz New York Trumpet Ensemble recording that had come out about that time. So we called it the Festival of Trumpets, and I invited about 50 people, and their name was in small print on the poster. And it attracted a lot of people, and they all, paid the tuition. Their schools sponsored most of them. And so that attracted a lot of people. And so I thought, well, you still need more students, because a lot of these professors said, well, I want my students to come, but they can't afford it. So is there anything they could play in to get my university to pay for it? And some of them said, we could put together a trumpet ensemble. And I thought, well, I don't know if we could have another Festival of Trumpets concert with all trumpet ensembles. But I thought, well, why not have these preludes where university trumpet group plays before every major concert or lecture? And so we started the preludes. And so that attracted, I don't know how many we had that first year, maybe a dozen trumpet ensembles. And that, of course, has grown a lot. really helps involve a lot of students. So that's how that got going.
What a great opportunity for students and junior faculty and full faculty. It definitely helps because school, you're right, schools, they need
Yeah.
to be able to, they won't pay unless we're
Right.
presenting. A little bit more on the competitions. We have some of the biggest competitions in the world, such as the Ellsworth Smith and the Carmine Caruso competition that was just a few weeks ago. Was fantastic competitions. Were you part of that, or you remember how that began as well?
Well, the Ellsworth Smith competition came from a written proposal I sent to ITG officers. It was about a 10-page proposal. I wanted to establish a solo competition that had major prize money, a major concert for them to play. It also included a New York debut recital and involvement with a record label to get a major record label to make a recording of the first prize winner. So ITG would fund the recording. ITG would fund the New York debut recital. They would, do the whole thing. And so I wrote this big proposal because, other than some big European trumpet competitions, Geneva and Munich and those kind of things, there weren't any in the United States. And ITG wanted to do it. The board and officers wanted to do it, but it was too expensive. And Richard Burkhart was the chairman or he was president then. And so he told me that, he said, well, we want to do it, but we're going to have to wait till we can find some outside funding. So right now it's just tabled. And then about a year later, maybe it's a couple years later, he called me and said, I think we found the funding. And the Columbus Foundation called him because he was teaching at Ohio State University. They called him one day and said there was a wealthy man named Ellsworth Smith who used to play cornet as an amateur, but he became very wealthy because he owned several lumber yards around Columbus. And when he died, he had no heirs, so he set up a foundation, and he wanted the funds from that foundation money to go to something to enhance cornet playing. And so they were thinking that Burkhart would use the money for scholarships to Ohio State University for cornet. And Burkhart said, well, we have a lot of scholarship money, but I would like to use the money for a trumpet competition. And we could name it after Ellsworth Smith. And we have a plan, and the ITG will host the thing and get it going. So that's how that started. So the first one was at Ohio State there in Columbus. And he asked me to be the chair of the judging committee. And the other judges were Ed Tarr and Crispian Still Perkins. Maybe it was just three of us, I think. And so that's how that started. And then the Carmine Caruso came about because, well, indirectly because of the Ellsworth Smith. Somebody had the idea of doing a competition like that for jazz trumpet. And by this time, Steve Jones was president of ITG. And he's found out that Herb Alpert would be interested in funding it, or at least he thought he could through the Herb Alpert Foundation. So Steve took the proposal that I wrote for the what ended up being Ellsworth Smith, and just modified it and sent that to the Herb Alpert Foundation, and Herb Alpert approved it. And so that's where that has come from, and still running and very successful.
Very successful, for sure. a little bit more about ITG. The commissions have been, um, I think, very important, and there's been some outstanding pieces, such as the Erica Wazen Sonata, the Della Gioia Sonata, which for whatever reason hasn't really caught on as much as the Wazen. But do you remember how that came about?
Well, yeah, the ITG, when I was president, we tried to get a commissions committee going, and we gave them the task of coming up with some ideas for commissions. So they came back with the idea of having a composition contest for trumpet ensemble music. And I don't know if that's still going, but they did publish. They had a competition, pieces submitted, and then they pick a winner every year. And I think ITG published that piece. And quite often it was given out as a freebie to the membership, the first supplements. And then they wanted to commission a sonata, and they wanted to get Norman Del Gioia, who was the chair of the New England Conservatory then. So I was president, and I talked to him, and we commissioned him, and he sent me the original manuscript, and it was premiered by Armando Gatalla at the 1979 ITG conference at Arizona State University. And then, then they just kept following after that. The funny story, the committee came back with the idea because we were hoping that we could commission a major trumpet concerto with full orchestra by a major composer. And so we gave them a year to come back with ideas. And so Steve Jones at that time was the chair of that committee, and they were to talk to composers or their representatives, and maybe talk to their publishers and see about a commission. And they came back and they came up with about a dozen names, big name people, and the board discussed each one. And everybody on the board, a lot of them were former orchestra players, Louis Davidson and some others who said, oh, the orchestra I played in commissioned a piece by that guy, and it turned out to be a flop, and it was a lot of money. We don't want to commission him. It may not be any good. So everybody kept getting knocked down. Well, the only big name left was Leonard Bernstein. And Steve was kind of excited. He said that he had talked to Bernstein, and Bernstein talked to his publisher, and Bernstein called him back and said, I would like to do it for a reduced fee because I really would like to write a trumpet concerto, and I'd like to write it I want it to be premiered by Maurice Andre, and then Leonard wanted to conduct it, and he said I can get the London Symphony to do it, and it'll be on whatever label, RCA or whatever at that time that Bernstein was hooked up with. And he wanted $25,000, which was for the commission and copying parts, which seemed like a better deal than a lot of the other composers were offering. And he said he could get it done in, I think, 2 years. And this all sounded fantastic. We figured, okay, Maurice Andre will probably want to do it, and it'll be a big recording. And we said we wanted to also have piano reduction so it could be published, so all trumpet players could have access to it and play with orchestra if they wanted to rent the parts. Bernstein was on board. He was all to go, and the ITG board just blew it out of the water, said, no way, that's too much money. And
Wow.
Bernstein was willing he wanted half the money up front to get the commission in line, and then the rest payable when it was finished in 2 years. And I kept saying, well, and Ed Tarr was there at that meeting too. We kept saying, this may be the one concerto that 200 years from now, trumpet players will say from the 20th century, That's the biggest, maybe the only really big trumpet concerto. But there were others said, well, we commissioned Bernstein to write a piece for our orchestra. It was a little, ended up, we paid him gobs of money. It was like a little 5-minute fanfare. And it wasn't very good. And so they just weren't willing to spend the money to gamble on it. So it never happened.
What could have been?
Yeah, what could have been.
Speaking of recordings, the supplements that are offered with the journal to members began as well. Do you remember how that began, the recordings and the CDs that were given as supplemental?
I don't really know how the modern ones are working, the ones of living players. The first trumpet recording that ITG had anything to do with was put out on Crystal Records. It was those Herbert Clark recordings. Mm-hmm. And the Herbert Clark Library was at the University of Illinois where I taught. And so I had this idea of taking all of his early gramophone recordings, transferring them to LP back then, and reissue them. And it was going to be a little bit expensive to get them all remastered and what they call declicked, because those old recordings had so much hissing and clicking noises on them, turning the gramophone crank and everything. So to get the software to do that, you have to go to a pretty big studio. It's going to be expensive. So I asked ITG if they'd be willing to do it, and they said yes. And then we got Crystal Records to agree to put it out if we finished it. So Ed Tarr and I took that on, and I got all the recordings sent, or they were mastered, remastered in a studio that I worked with. And then I sent the recordings to Ed, and he checked them out and made sure they were correct in terms of the pitch, because we were worried about, a lot of those old recordings were done at low pitch, where A wasn't 440, it was like A 438. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to make sure that they were recorded at the tempo that Clark recorded them at. So we found out the years they were recorded and where and what pitch standards they were using. And Ed Tarr did all that research, and we found out that it was all correct, and we sent it to Crystal, and I hired Gerald Inslee to write the program notes. And he wrote like a 3-page program note thing. It was one of those fold open LP jackets. Mm-hmm. And then later that came out on CD. And so that's the only one I was involved with. After that, I know ITG has done the recordings, but I was never part of the discussion of those.
Well, you've done so much for ITG just from hearing your story. Are you pleased with?
I planted some seeds.
Yes, certainly. Yeah. Are you pleased with how ITG has grown, and are you optimistic about the future?
Oh yeah, very pleased with how it's grown. I'm not sure what the current membership is. Do you know?
I don't, unfortunately.
Because it seemed like when I finished my presidency, I think we got up to either 6,000 or 7,000 people. And I'm not sure it's grown a whole lot since then. It's kind of leveled off. But I'm not sure what the current numbers are. But I'd like to see more people join, particularly younger people. Yeah. But the journal certainly has grown to 4 journals a year now, and they're all spectacular. I think they involve a lot of students, a lot of that cover all aspects of trumpet history, jazz, solo playing, compositions, everything, record reviews. I mean, it's a very nice journal. So I'm very pleased with everything. I just wish I had a good idea about how to increase the membership.
It's always ongoing talks on how to do that, but I'm very optimistic. Yeah. So what is you've been to many ITGs. What are some of your favorite ITG memories?
Oh gosh, there's so many. so many of the trumpet players I know, I've, got to know through ITG. And maybe my favorite memory is when I hosted that 77 ITG conference. Our big artist of the year was Timothy Dochitzer, and we had a lot of other outstanding artists. And when it was finished on the final night after the final concert, we had a reception at my home, and it was great to see, all these great artists were there. Dochitzer and Schilke and gosh, about everybody you could name, was there. And it just seemed, I'm looking around saying, this is my home. And look at these guys, all my idols were there. And of course the ITG officers and board were there too. And that was very, very memorable. Otherwise, there are just lots and lots of concerts that I enjoyed and opportunities to meet people for the first time in many cases.
Well, maybe one last question, and it would be, what would be some advice you would give to someone who wants to do what you're doing?
Oh, well, I'm retired, so I'm not doing much nowadays, but I don't know. I think the main thing is to stick with it. If you decide it's what you want to do, you got to go for it. And of course, I was involved with teaching and performing and publishing and recording, and as many aspects of it as I could. I think it's good to do as much of everything as you can, and then you may find what you're best at. You can specialize in that, but keep all of it going. I remember I had so many students that I say, would you like to become a classical soloist? Well, I don't know. I like solo playing, but I'm not thinking I want to do that. Well, what about playing an orchestra? Well, I don't know if I want to do it full. They like everything, but they don't really want to get involved very much. You just got to take the plunge, and it not only like what you're doing, you're performing, you're teaching, you get different income streams, which is important. And because, if all you did was play in an orchestra, what's going to happen if COVID happens and you're shut down for a year? What happens if the orchestra goes belly up because somebody, embezzled the orchestra and the money's gone? And, or the orchestra just folded for lack of fundraising or whatever. It's hard to say. It's nice to have a teaching position, even if you're adjunct. It's nice to have, the ability to go out and play solo recitals or do clinics. So do it all. And if people tell you you can't do it, just smile and say, okay, well, thank you. But in your heart, I can, and I'm going to do it. Don't give up. Because I certainly, I wanted to be a classical soloist, which I carved out a decent career doing that. And everybody and their dog told me it'll never happen. There are no classical trumpet soloists. It's not. Well, Maurice Andre cracked that door open, which helped a lot of trumpet players. And sure, it can happen, but go to a school where you can get the education for what you want to do, and really give it a shot. I do feel sorry for people that want to do the public school band directing jobs now, because music education it's always been on the bubble. But I think public school teaching now in general is getting harder and harder. Not only to find the jobs in music, but to find good ones and to get decent pay. But if that's where your heart is, then do it. My musical hero has always been my high school band director. I grew up in this little farm town, Nebraska. They had one elementary school, one junior high, one high school, and he was the band director for all three. And this is a guy who loved every kid in the band. He was a guy who could teach all the instruments, taught private lessons, for 50 cents a lesson. When I started taking lessons, there were 50 cents for a 30-minute lesson. And then later he changed it to $1, which was still, for what I thought was really cheap even back then, But he just encouraged the kids to do it because it made a better band. And he didn't care if you were first chair or last chair. He loved you. He wanted to see you get your potential in life, not just music. He was one of those guys who really taught the value of teamwork, personal goals, work ethic, and of course, music. So when he passed away, in this, I'm talking a little farm town of a couple thousand people. When he passed away, I performed at his funeral. The auditorium, which held 700 people, was completely packed. And you just never saw that. That's the kind of hero he was to everybody in that town. And the people that got up to talk about him were kids that were in his band. The mayor, all the top officials, and the superintendent of schools, all these people had played in his band at one time or another. And they all said the same thing I'm telling you. They learned to become a better person and realize and become confident and learn to have goals and teamwork and the whole thing. So that's the value of music education. And I really encourage people to do it if it's in their heart. I just wish them good luck in being able to do it nowadays.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Mr. Hickman. It's been an honor. And thank you for all you've done for ITG.
Hey, thanks, Rachel. It's been great talking with you.